I always knew that dinner would be different. The way my boyfriend Marcus avoided eye contact when he finally invited me to meet his family should have been a warning sign. After 2 years together, I was finally going to meet his famous mother, Patricia Lynn, whom he always described as protective and traditional. What I didn't know was that traditional was just a euphemism for what I was about to discover. If this story touches you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Because what happened that night changed everything about how I saw love, family, and my own worth. Marcus had been putting off this meeting for months. Every time I brought up meeting his family, he'd find some excuse. His mother was traveling, she was busy with work, or she wasn't feeling well. I started to wonder if he was ashamed of me or if there was something he wasn't telling me. We'd been living together for 8 months, and I thought we were serious. I mean, we talked about the future, about moving to a bigger apartment, about maybe getting a dog. But every time family came up, he'd change the subject. Looking back now, I should have recognized the pattern. It wasn't just his family. Marcus had a way of compartmentalizing his life that I had initially found mysterious and intriguing, but was beginning to realize was actually problematic. His work friends knew nothing about me beyond my first name. His college buddies had met me exactly once at a group dinner where Marcus barely acknowledged me all evening. Even his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who he chatted with regularly, had no idea he had a live-in girlfriend. I told myself he was just a private person, that some people took longer to open up about their personal lives. My own family had embraced him from day one. My parents loved having him over for Sunday dinners. My sister treated him like the brother she never had, and my grandmother had already started knitting him a Christmas sweater. I assumed his family would be the same way once they got to know me. How naive I was. The first red flag should have been when he suggested I dress conservatively for the dinner. When I asked what he meant, he got flustered and said his mother was old-fashioned about certain things. When I pressed for specifics, he mentioned that she preferred when women dressed appropriately, and that she might comment if my outfit was too casual or too revealing. I laughed it off at the time, thinking he was just being overly cautious. But now I realize he was already preparing me to make myself smaller, to conform to his mother's expectations before I even met her. The second red flag was his behavior in the days leading up to the dinner. Marcus, who was normally relaxed and easygoing, became increasingly anxious and controlling. He questioned my choice of wine for the hostess gift, suggesting I might want something more sophisticated than the bottle I'd selected. He critiqued my conversation topics, warning me away from mentioning my promotion at work because it might sound like I was showing off. He even coached me on how to respond to certain questions, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted to represent myself appropriately. "Just remember," he said the night before the dinner, "my mother values tradition and family history. She might ask about your background, your family, that sort of thing. Maybe don't mention that your dad was laid off last year or that your mom didn't go to college. It's not that there's anything wrong with those things," he added quickly, seeing my expression. "It's just that she has certain expectations." I should have walked away right then. I should have asked him why he was dating someone whose family background embarrassed him, why he thought I needed to hide fundamental truths about who I was to be acceptable to his mother. Instead, I convinced myself he was just trying to help me make a good first impression. I told myself that all families had their quirks, their sensitive areas, and that it was loving of Marcus to prepare me for his mother's personality. The third red flag was his demeanor during the drive to Westchester. Marcus, who normally chatted easily about anything and everything, was silent and tense. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and he kept checking his appearance in the rearview mirror at red lights. When I tried to lighten the mood with a joke, he barely managed a weak smile. "Are you okay?" I asked as we pulled into his childhood neighborhood. "You seem really stressed." "I'm fine," he said quickly. "I just want tonight to go well, you know. It's important to me that you and my mother get along." At the time, I thought this was sweet, that he wanted the two most important women in his life to like each other. Now I understand that what he really wanted was for me to pass his mother's test, to prove that I was worthy of being in his life. The distinction is crucial, though I didn't see it then. The house in Westchester was exactly what I'd imagined. A sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured lawns and that old money elegance that screamed established family. The circular driveway was lined with mature oak trees, and the front garden looked like something out of Better Homes and Gardens. Even the mailbox looked expensive, with the family name engraved in elegant script on polished brass. As we pulled up to the front door, I noticed Marcus's hands were actually shaking slightly. This wasn't just nervousness about introducing his girlfriend to his mother. This was fear. And that should have been my fourth red flag, though I was too focused on my own anxiety to recognize it for what it was. "Remember what I told you," Marcus said as we sat in the car for a moment. "My mom can be a little intense. Just be yourself, but maybe tone it down a bit." Tone it down? I wasn't sure what that meant, but I nodded anyway. I wanted this to work so badly. I wanted his family to love me the way mine loved him. I wanted to be the kind of woman who could fit seamlessly into his world, who could make his life richer and fuller rather than more complicated. The irony, of course, is that by wanting so desperately to be accepted, I had already started the process of making myself smaller. I had already begun to internalize the message that who I naturally was might not be good enough, that I needed to present a curated version of myself to be deemed worthy of love and acceptance. Patricia Lynn answered the door herself, and I was immediately struck by how put together she was. Even at home, she looked like she'd stepped out of a country club catalog, perfectly styled blonde hair that had clearly been professionally colored and set, immaculate makeup applied with expert precision, wearing what I was sure was a designer blouse, and slacks that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her jewelry was understated but obviously expensive: pearl earrings, a simple gold watch, a wedding ring that sparkled with a diamond I could see from 3 feet away. She was beautiful in that intimidating way that some older women manage to perfect, where every detail is flawless and calculated. There was nothing natural or effortless about her appearance. Everything was carefully constructed to project wealth, status, and unassailable superiority. Even her smile seemed practiced, as if she'd perfected it in front of a mirror until it achieved the exact right balance of warmth and distance. "Marcus, darling," she said, embracing him with the kind of theatrical affection that somehow managed to be both warm and performative. She held him just a beat too long, as if she was making a point about their bond, before turning to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And you must be Sarah Michelle." The way she said my name felt deliberate, like she was testing how it sounded, weighing whether it was worthy of being spoken in her home. There was something in her tone, not quite disdain, but certainly not approval. It was as if she was already finding me lacking before I'd even said a word. I extended my hand with what I hoped was confident warmth, but she hesitated for just a moment before taking it in a brief, limp handshake that somehow managed to convey both reluctant politeness and complete dismissal. Her hand was soft and manicured, with nails painted in a subtle shade that probably had a name like Refined Rose or Elegant Nude. Everything about her physical presence was designed to remind me that she existed in a world of luxury and refinement that I had only glimpsed from the outside. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Mrs. Patterson," I said, putting all the enthusiasm I could muster into my voice. "Marcus talks about you all the time. He absolutely adores you." "Does he?" she replied, glancing at her son with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was satisfaction there, certainly, but also something that looked almost like suspicion, as if she was wondering what Marcus might have told me about their relationship. "Well, come in," she continued, stepping aside to let us enter. "Dinner's almost ready. I do hope you're hungry. I've prepared quite a spread." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the outside. Everything looked expensive and untouchable: crystal chandeliers that caught the light from every angle, oriental rugs that looked like they belonged in a museum, oil paintings in heavy gold frames that depicted pastoral scenes and stern-looking ancestors. The furniture was all antique or antique-looking, the kind of pieces that whisper old money and established taste. Family photos covered every available surface: the mantelpiece, side tables, built-in bookshelves, even the grand piano that dominated one corner of the living room. The photos chronicled Marcus's life from infancy through his college graduation and beyond, but what struck me immediately was how curated they were. Every photo showed Marcus at his best, perfectly dressed, perfectly groomed, engaged in appropriately impressive activities. There he was in his Harvard graduation robes, accepting some kind of academic award, dressed in formal wear at what looked like charity galas, skiing in Aspen, sailing in what I assumed was the Hamptons. But what struck me more was the presence of other women in many of the photos. Blonde, polished-looking women who appeared in multiple pictures across different time periods. These weren't just random friends or family members. These were clearly girlfriends, each one stunning and accomplished-looking, each one fitting seamlessly into the elegant world that Patricia Lynn had created in this house. I tried not to read too much into it, but I couldn't help noticing that all of these women looked remarkably similar. They were all conventionally beautiful in that upper-class way: straight blonde hair, perfect teeth, expensive clothes, confident smiles that suggested they belonged in this world without question. None of them looked like me. "Your home is absolutely beautiful," I said as she led us into the living room, trying to sound genuine despite the intimidation I was feeling. "Have you lived here long?" 32 years, she replied with obvious pride. "Marcus's father and I bought it when he was just a baby. Marcus grew up in this house, learned his values here. Family tradition is very important to us." There was something in the way she emphasized family tradition that made my stomach clench slightly, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was being paranoid. She was just proud of her home, proud of the life she had built for her family. Any mother would be. Marcus seemed to relax slightly once we were inside, though I noticed he kept glancing at his mother as if he was trying to read her mood, trying to gauge how the evening was going to unfold. It reminded me of the way children watch their parents for signs of approval or disapproval, and something about that dynamic made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite articulate. "Can I offer you something to drink?" Patricia Lynn asked. "We have wine, cocktails, sparkling water. Marcus, you know where everything is. Why don't you fix drinks while I check on dinner?" As soon as she left the room, Marcus's tension returned full force. He busied himself at the bar cart, his movements quick and nervous. "How do you think it's going?" he asked without looking at me. "It's been 10 minutes, I said gently. "I think it's going fine. She seems lovely." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. There was something about Patricia Lynn's demeanor that felt calculated, as if every word and gesture was carefully chosen for maximum effect. She wasn't just being polite. She was performing politeness while simultaneously evaluating me for worthiness. Marcus's father, Robert, joined us for cocktails, and he was noticeably warmer than his wife. He asked about my work as a marketing coordinator with genuine interest, seemed impressed when I mentioned the campaigns I'd worked on, and even complimented the wine I'd brought. He was charming and engaging, the kind of man who made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. "Marketing is such a dynamic field," he said as we settled into the elegant seating area. "Always changing, always evolving. You must have to stay on top of so many different trends and technologies." "I love that aspect of it," I replied, feeling myself relax for the first time all evening. "Every client is different. Every campaign presents new challenges. It keeps things interesting." "Robert's always been fascinated by marketing psychology," Marcus chimed in, and I was grateful to hear some warmth returning to his voice. "He says it's one of the most underrated forms of applied psychology." For a moment, I started to think maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Robert was asking thoughtful questions about consumer behavior and brand loyalty, seeming genuinely interested in my perspective. Marcus was contributing to the conversation in a way that suggested he was proud of my knowledge and insights. I began to think that maybe I had misread Patricia Lynn's initial coolness. Maybe she was just reserved with new people. Maybe she would warm up as the evening progressed. But I noticed how Patricia Lynn watched every interaction from the kitchen doorway, her eyes calculating and assessing. When Robert laughed at one of my stories about a particularly difficult client, she gave him a sharp look that made him quickly change the subject. When Marcus put his arm around me on the couch in a moment of affectionate comfort, she cleared her throat and announced that dinner was ready with an expression of barely concealed disapproval. The dining room was formal and intimidating, with a table that could easily seat 12 but was set for just 4. Patricia Lynn had obviously gone all out. Fine china with delicate gold trim, crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier, silver cutlery that looked like it belonged in a museum, and an elaborate centerpiece of white roses arranged with professional precision. The table settings were perfect, each place setting positioned with mathematical exactness, the napkins folded into precise triangles. It should have felt welcoming, like a celebration of family and togetherness, but instead, it felt like a test I was destined to fail. Every element of the room seemed designed to remind me that I was in someone else's territory, playing by rules I didn't fully understand. The conversation during the first course was stilted but manageable. Patricia Lynn asked polite questions about my background, my family, my education. But there was something clinical about her interrogation. She wasn't asking because she was interested in getting to know me. She was collecting data, building a profile, looking for weaknesses and points of attack. I answered honestly, talking about my middle-class upbringing in Cleveland, my state school education at Ohio University, my parents' hardware store that they had built from nothing into a thriving community business. With each answer, I watched her expression grow slightly more distant, slightly more disapproving, as if each detail about my background confirmed something she had already suspected. Cleveland, she repeated when I mentioned where I was from, as if the word left a bad taste in her mouth. How interesting. I don't think I've ever been to Ohio. And your parents own a hardware store? Yes, I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice despite her obvious disdain. They started with nothing but a small business loan and a lot of determination. My dad worked construction for 15 years while building the business on weekends, and my mom handled all the bookkeeping and customer service. They now employ 12 people full-time, and they're genuine pillars of the community. The store sponsors Little League teams, they donate supplies for community projects, and they've helped dozens of young people get their start in trades and construction. How admirable, she said in a tone that suggested she found it anything but admirable. Manual labor is so honest. The way she said honest made it sound like a character flaw rather than a virtue. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but I kept smiling. Marcus said nothing, just focused intently on his salad as if the arrangement of greens and cherry tomatoes required his complete concentration. As the main course was served, an elaborate beef tenderloin with roasted vegetables that had clearly been prepared by someone who took cooking very seriously, Patricia Lynn's questions became more pointed and personal. She wanted to know about my career ambitions, my plans for the future, whether I intended to pursue further education, what my 5-year plan looked like. Each question felt like a trap, designed to highlight everything I wasn't rather than celebrate what I was. Marketing coordination, she mused after I explained my current role. That's more of a support function, isn't it? Not really leadership material. The dismissal was casual but devastating. In 2 sentences, she had reduced my entire career to a subordinate role, suggesting that I was inherently unsuited for positions of real responsibility or authority. I enjoy supporting the creative process and helping bring campaigns to life, I replied carefully, trying to maintain my dignity while defending my worth. And I'm actually being considered for a promotion to marketing manager next quarter. It would mean overseeing a team of 5 coordinators and having final approval authority on campaign strategies. Oh, how nice, she said dismissively, as if my potential promotion was roughly equivalent to getting a gold star on a kindergarten assignment. Marcus, remember when Jennifer was promoted to senior partner at her law firm? She was only 29 when it happened. Such an accomplished girl. Brilliant mind, really. She argued cases in front of the state Supreme Court. Jennifer. Another ex-girlfriend, apparently. whose achievements were being used as a weapon against my own aspirations. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat and mumbled something non-committal about Jennifer being really smart, but he didn't defend me or change the subject or point out that different career paths had different trajectories and measures of success. The wine helped dull the edges of my humiliation, but not enough. With each passing minute, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and more inadequate in the face of Patricia Lynn's perfectly polite cruelty. She never said anything outright rude. She was far too sophisticated and well-bred for such obvious tactics. Instead, she delivered death by 1,000 paper cuts, each comment designed to remind me that I didn't belong in this world, that I was an interloper who had somehow tricked her son into bringing me into their refined sphere. "Sarah Michelle, dear," she said, as dessert was being served, an elaborate crème brûlée that looked like it belonged in a French patisserie. "Marcus tells me you're quite the cook. How lovely. I do think it's important for women to maintain those traditional skills, don't you? There's something so grounding about being able to create a proper meal, to nurture through food." It was a trap, and I knew it. If I agreed, I was reinforcing outdated gender roles and suggesting that women belonged primarily in domestic roles. If I disagreed, I was rejecting tradition and family values, confirming her suspicion that I was some kind of feminist radical who would corrupt her son's traditional worldview. I tried to find middle ground, to give an answer that couldn't be used against me. "I do enjoy cooking," I said carefully, measuring each word. "But Marcus is actually the better chef between us. He makes this amazing carbonara that would put most Italian restaurants to shame. He's got such an intuitive understanding of flavors and timing." I thought this was safe territory, praising her son while gently deflecting the gender stereotype. But I had underestimated Patricia Lynn's skill at turning any statement into ammunition. "Oh, I taught him that recipe," she said, with a cold smile that suggested she had won some kind of victory I didn't even know we were competing for. It was his grandmother's recipe, passed down through 4 generations of Patterson women. He used to make it for Stephanie all the time when they were together. She was such a wonderful girl, really appreciated the importance of family traditions and heritage. She understood that food isn't just about nutrition, it's about connection to history, to family, to the values that make us who we are. Another ex-girlfriend. Another perfect woman who had somehow failed to become her daughter-in-law, but who was apparently still held up as the gold standard against which all future candidates would be measured. I glanced at Marcus desperately, hoping for some sign of support, some indication that he would step in and redirect this conversation away from his romantic history and toward something less humiliating. But he was staring at his dessert like it held the secrets of the universe, apparently fascinated by the caramelized sugar coating of his crème brûlée. "Family traditions are important," I agreed, my voice sounding smaller and less confident than I intended. "I'd love to learn more about Marcus's family history, about the recipes and stories that have been passed down. I think it's beautiful when families maintain those connections across generations. Would you?" Patricia Lynn's eyes lit up with what I initially mistook for warmth, but quickly realized was more like a predator spotting wounded prey. "How wonderful. You know, the Patterson family has quite a distinguished lineage. We can trace our ancestry back to the Mayflower. We have the documentation, of course, verified by professional genealogists. Marcus's great-grandfather was a federal judge who helped shape important precedents in constitutional law. His grandfather built one of the most successful investment firms on the East Coast, creating the foundation of our family's financial security for generations." She paused to take a delicate sip of her wine, letting the weight of this family history settle over the table like a blanket of superiority. "Education and achievement have always been paramount in our family," she continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a lecture to particularly slow students. "We've produced lawyers, doctors, judges, business leaders, university professors, people who shape society, who contribute to the intellectual and cultural advancement of their communities." She let that hang in the air for a moment, the implicit comparison to my own family's humble hardware store clear as crystal. In her worldview, there was a hierarchy of human worth, and my family's honest labor and community service ranked far below her family's professional achievements and accumulated wealth. "Marcus could have his pick of anyone, you know," she said, her tone conversational but her words surgical. "He's always attracted such accomplished women. Lawyers like Jennifer, doctors like Catherine, investment bankers like Amanda. Women who understand what it means to be part of a family like ours, women who can contribute to our legacy rather than simply benefit from it." I felt like I'd been slapped. The message was crystal clear. I wasn't good enough, hadn't achieved enough, wasn't worthy of her precious son. And still, Marcus said nothing. He sat there, allowing his mother to systematically demolish my self-worth while he concentrated on his dessert. "Mom," he finally said, but his voice was weak, almost pleading rather than defending. "Sarah's great at what she does. Great at what I do. Not accomplished, not remarkable, not someone he was proud to be with. Just adequate at my little support job." Patricia Lynn smiled at him indulgently, the way you might smile at a child who's defending an imaginary friend. "Of course she is, darling. I'm sure she's perfectly lovely in her own way. Perfectly lovely in my own way." The condescension was breathtaking. The conversation shifted then, to family, friends, and upcoming social events that I obviously wouldn't be invited to. Patricia Lynn and Marcus discussed people I'd never met, charity galas I'd never attend, and inside jokes I'd never understand. I sat there feeling invisible, like a piece of furniture they had to navigate around. "Oh, and Marcus," Patricia Lynn said suddenly, as if she'd just remembered something important. "The Hendersons are having their annual summer party next month. You simply must attend. Their daughter Caroline just finished her residency at Johns Hopkins. She's going to be a pediatric surgeon. Such an impressive young woman." Caroline. Yet another accomplished woman being dangled in front of me like a comparison I could never win. And Marcus just nodded along, promising to check his calendar, as if the woman he'd supposedly been building a life with for 2 years wasn't sitting right there beside him. I excused myself to use the restroom, partly because I needed a moment to collect myself, and partly because I was afraid I might start crying right there at the dinner table. The powder room was as pristine as the rest of the house, marble countertops, monogrammed hand towels, and a small crystal vase filled with fresh flowers. I stared at myself in the ornate mirror and tried to remember who I was outside of this house, outside of Patricia Lynn's withering gaze. I was a good person. I worked hard. I treated people with kindness. I made Marcus laugh. I supported his dreams. I loved him with everything I had. But somehow, in this house, surrounded by all this inherited elegance and old money sophistication, I felt like nothing. I felt like exactly what Patricia Lynn wanted me to feel like. An interloper, a temporary inconvenience, someone who simply didn't measure up. When I returned to the dining room, they were looking at photo albums. Marcus was showing his mother pictures from our recent vacation to Cape Cod, and I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this was his way of showing her that I was important to him, that we had made beautiful memories together. But as I approached the table, I heard Patricia Lynn's response to a photo of us watching the sunset from our hotel balcony. "That's a lovely sunset, darling," she said, her tone suggesting the sunset was the only lovely thing in the picture. "You know, your father and I honeymooned on the Cape. We stayed at the Weequassett Resort, much more refined than those budget places most people choose nowadays. Budget places. Our hotel had cost us $300 a night, which had been a stretch for both of us, but something we'd saved up for because we wanted to celebrate our second anniversary somewhere special. But in Patricia Lynn's world, anything less than 5-star luxury was apparently slumming it. I sat back down, and Marcus closed the photo album quickly, as if he was embarrassed by the evidence of our happiness together. That hurt more than anything his mother had said all evening. "Coffee?" Patricia Lynn offered, her hostess mask sliding back into place. I accepted, hoping that maybe the evening was winding down and I could escape soon. But as she served the coffee in delicate porcelain cups that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, I realized she wasn't done with me yet. "So, Sarah Michelle," she said, settling back into her chair with the satisfied air of someone about to deliver a final blow. "What are your intentions with my son?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked up sharply, finally showing some sign of discomfort with the direction of the conversation. "Mom, that's not really—" "No, it's fine," I interrupted, finding some reservoir of strength I didn't know I still had. "I love Marcus. I love him deeply, and I want to build a life with him. I want us to grow together, to support each other's dreams, to create something beautiful and lasting." Patricia Lynn listened to my answer with the expression of someone watching a mildly interesting but ultimately disappointing performance. "How sweet," she said when I finished. "Young love is so earnest, isn't it? But Marcus, darling, you have to think about your future. About the kind of life you want to build, the kind of family you want to raise. These things matter." She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing wisdom with a beloved but naive child. "You've had your fun, sweetheart, and that's perfectly natural. But surely you can see that this isn't sustainable. You're at different levels, from different worlds. It's not fair to either of you to pretend otherwise." I felt the blood drain from my face. She was talking about me like I wasn't sitting right there, discussing my relationship with her son like I was a temporary phase he needed to outgrow. "Patricia," I began, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "Mrs. Patterson," she corrected coolly. "Mrs. Patterson," I continued. "I understand that you want the best for Marcus. Any mother would. But I think you might be underestimating—" "Am I?" she interrupted, her voice still pleasant but with steel underneath. "Let me ask you something, dear. What do you bring to this relationship? Really? Marcus has his trust fund, his family connections, his Harvard education, his promising career in finance. He has opportunities you couldn't even imagine. And you? What do you offer him?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to answer, but suddenly all my qualities felt inadequate. All my achievements seemed small and meaningless in the face of her casual dismissal. "I offer him love," I said quietly. "I offer him partnership, laughter, support." "Love," she repeated, as if the word left a bad taste in her mouth. How romantic. But love doesn't pay for private school tuitions, does it? Love doesn't open doors in society, doesn't provide the kind of connections that build careers and legacies. Love is lovely, dear, but it's not enough. I looked at Marcus desperately, waiting for him to say something, anything, to defend what we had built together, to tell his mother that love was enough, that I was enough, that what we had was real and valuable and worth fighting for. But he sat there in silence, staring at his coffee cup like it held all the answers to the universe's mysteries. Patricia Lynn watched this exchange with satisfaction, like a chess player who had just achieved checkmate. "Marcus knows what I'm talking about," she continued, her voice gentle now, almost pitying. "He's seen what real partnership looks like, what it means to be with someone who can match his achievements, his social standing, his aspirations, someone who can be an asset to his future, not a limitation." The word limitation hung in the air like poison. That's what I was to her. Not a person, not someone who made her son happy, but an obstacle to his real potential. "You're a sweet girl, Sarah Michelle," she said, and the fake kindness in her voice was somehow worse than outright cruelty. "But you have to understand, you're holding him back. You're keeping him from the life he was meant to have, the kind of marriage that builds dynasties rather than settling." Still, Marcus said nothing. His silence was becoming deafening, each second that passed without him defending me, or our relationship feeling like another small betrayal. I found myself thinking about all the times over the past 2 years when I'd made excuses for him. When he hadn't stood up to his boss who belittled him in meetings. When he'd let his college friends make subtle digs about my background at dinner parties. When he'd chosen keeping the peace over protecting my feelings. I'd told myself he just wasn't confrontational, that he showed his love in other ways. But sitting in that dining room, watching him allow his mother to systematically destroy my sense of self-worth, I realized that his silence wasn't just non-confrontational. It was cowardly. "I can see I've given you something to think about," Patricia Lynn said, clearly pleased with her work. "Marcus, why don't you walk Sarah Michelle to her car while I clear up these dishes?" She was dismissing me. After 2 hours of subtle torture, she was sending me away like a servant who had overstayed their welcome. And Marcus was going to let her do it. But then she delivered the final blow, the one that would echo in my head for weeks afterward. "You know, dear," she said, standing up and smoothing down her perfect blouse, "I've raised my son to reach for the stars, to never settle for less than he deserves. And honestly," she tilted her head slightly, studying me like a specimen under a microscope, "you'll never be enough for him. Not really. Deep down, you must know that." The words hit me like a physical slap. You'll never be enough for him. Not smart enough, not accomplished enough, not sophisticated enough, not worthy enough, just not enough. And Marcus, the man I loved, the man I'd built dreams with, the man I'd imagined spending my life with, said nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't contradict his mother, didn't even look at me. He just sat there, letting those words hang in the air like an accepted truth. That's when something inside me finally snapped. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. Patricia Lynn watched me with satisfaction, probably thinking she'd finally broken me down enough to make me run crying from her perfect house. But I didn't run. Instead, I looked directly at her, then at Marcus, then back at her. "You know what, Mrs. Patterson?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You're right about one thing. I will never be enough for Marcus, but not for the reasons you think." She raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting a response. "I will never be shallow enough to judge someone's worth by their bank account or their family name. I will never be cruel enough to tear someone down just to make myself feel superior. I will never be so insecure about my own value that I need to diminish others to feel important. And I will never, ever be cowardly enough to let someone I claim to love be attacked without defending them." Patricia Lynn's composed mask slipped for just a moment, surprise flickering across her features. "I have spent this entire evening listening to you list all the ways I'm not good enough for your son," I continued, gaining momentum. "But you know what you haven't mentioned once? How I make him laugh until his sides ache. How I stayed up all night taking care of him when he had food poisoning last month. How I believed in him when he was scared to ask for that promotion at work. How I've supported his dreams, celebrated his successes, and loved him exactly as he is, not as a project to be improved or a status symbol to be displayed." I picked up my purse, my hands remarkably steady now that I'd found my voice. "You're right that love isn't enough, but not in the way you think. Love isn't enough when it's one-sided. Love isn't enough when one person does all the giving and the other does all the taking. Love isn't enough when someone is too weak to defend it." I looked at Marcus one final time, hoping against hope that he would finally find his voice, that he would stand up and choose me over his mother's approval. But he just sat there, looking miserable but saying nothing. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Patterson," I said politely. "It was illuminating." And then I walked out. I walked through that perfect living room with its perfect family photos, past the perfect entryway with its perfect crystal chandelier, and out the front door into the cool evening air. I heard footsteps behind me as I reached my car, and for a moment my heart leaped, thinking Marcus had finally found his courage. But it was just the sound of my own heels on the pavement echoing off the walls of the house. He never came after me. I sat in my car for a moment, hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. 2 years of my life. 2 years of loving someone who couldn't love me enough to defend me when it mattered. 2 years of building dreams with someone who was apparently embarrassed by the very qualities that made me who I was. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Can we talk about this tomorrow? Mom didn't mean it the way it sounded." Mom didn't mean it the way it sounded. Even now, even after everything, he was making excuses for her and minimizing what had happened. He wasn't asking if I was okay, wasn't apologizing for his silence, wasn't acknowledging how deeply his mother had hurt me or how completely he had failed to protect me. I deleted the text without responding and drove home. The next few days were a blur of hurt and anger and confused emotions. Marcus called multiple times, but I wasn't ready to talk. He sent flowers with a note saying he was sorry things had gotten awkward at dinner. Awkward. As if his mother's systematic demolition of my self-worth was just a minor social hiccup. My sister Emma came over on the third day and found me still in my pajamas, eating ice cream and watching rom-coms where the guy actually fought for the girl. "Okay, spill," she said, settling onto my couch and stealing a spoonful of my Ben & Jerry's. "What did that spineless boyfriend of yours do now?" I told her everything, from Patricia Lynn's subtle digs to her final devastating declaration to Marcus's complete failure to defend me. Emma listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. "Oh, hell no," she said when I finished. "Please tell me you're done with him." "I don't know," I admitted. "I mean, I love him. And maybe his mom will come around once she gets to know me better." "Sarah Michelle," Emma interrupted, using the same tone of voice our mother used when she was about to deliver hard truth. "Listen to yourself. You're making excuses for someone who let his mommy tell you that you'll never be good enough for him. You're talking about winning over a woman who spent 2 hours trying to convince you that you're not worthy of her precious son's love. She was right, but it still hurt to hear it laid out so starkly. But what if I misunderstood?" I said weakly. "What if she was just trying to protect him, and I took it too personally?" "Did you misunderstand? You'll never be enough for him?" Emma asked pointedly. "Because that seems pretty clear to me. And did you misunderstand Marcus sitting there like a bump on a log while she said it?" I couldn't argue with that. "You know what the worst part is?" Emma continued, her voice gentler now. "It's not even about his awful mother. It's about him. The right person for you, the person who actually deserves your love, would never let anyone talk to you like that. Not his mother, not his friends, not anybody. They would shut that shit down immediately because they would be so appalled that someone dared to disrespect the person they love." She was right, and deep down, I knew it. But 2 years of love doesn't just disappear overnight, even when it's been shown to be one-sided. Marcus finally showed up at my apartment on the 4th day, looking haggard and desperate. I almost didn't let him in, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what he could possibly say to explain away what had happened. "Sarah, baby, please," he said as soon as I opened the door. "We need to talk about this. You can't just disappear on me like that." "I'm not the one who disappeared," I said coolly. "You disappeared the moment your mother started tearing me apart. Where were you, Marcus? Where was the man who claims to love me?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I used to find endearing but now just found irritating. "You don't understand," he said. "My mother is complicated. She's been through a lot, and she's very protective of me. She didn't mean those things personally. She told me I'll never be enough for you," I said flatly. "How exactly is that not personal?" She was testing you," he said weakly. "She does that with everyone. She tested Jennifer too, and Stephanie, and—" "Stop," I interrupted. "Just stop. Do you hear yourself right now? You're comparing me to your ex-girlfriends and making excuses for your mother telling me I'm not good enough for you. Do you even see what's wrong with that picture?" He looked confused, like I was speaking a foreign language. "I need you to understand something, Marcus," I continued. "I don't need your mother's approval to know my own worth. I don't need her to validate my relationship with you. But I do need my partner to stand up for me when someone, anyone, including his mother, tries to tear me down. And you didn't do that." "I was trying to keep the peace," he said defensively. "If I had argued with her, it would have just made things worse." "Worse for who?" I asked. "Because it couldn't have been much worse for me. I sat there for 2 hours while she systematically listed all the ways I'm inadequate, and you said nothing. You let her treat me like I was some gold-digging interloper who had tricked you into dating beneath your station. That's not how I see you." "But it's how you let her see me," I interrupted. "And more importantly, it's how you showed me you see our relationship. as something you need to apologize for, something you're embarrassed by, something that needs to be managed and contained rather than celebrated and protected. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the truth of what I was saying. "I love you," he said finally, like that was supposed to fix everything. "I know you do," I replied sadly. "But you love your mother's approval more. You love keeping the peace more. You love being seen as the obedient son more than you love being seen as my partner. Hey, I'm curious to know where you're watching this story from. Drop a comment with your city and country. I'd love to know where my stories are reaching." "That's not fair," he protested. "Isn't it?" I challenged. "When was the last time you chose me over what other people wanted? When was the last time you prioritized my feelings over avoiding conflict? When was the last time you made me feel like I was the most important person in your life?" He couldn't answer, and his silence was answer enough. "Your mother was right about one thing," I said quietly. "I will never be enough for you. But that's because you don't want a partner. You want someone who fits into your life without causing any waves, someone who makes your mother happy, someone who enhances your image without challenging you to grow or change or stand up for what you believe in." I walked to the door and opened it. "I deserve someone who thinks I'm enough exactly as I am," I said. "I deserve someone who would be proud to introduce me to his family, who would defend me against anyone who tried to diminish me, who would choose me even when it's difficult or inconvenient. And until you can be that person, we don't have anything to talk about." He left without another word, and I knew our relationship was over. The weeks that followed were hard. I grieved not just the loss of Marcus, but the loss of the future I had imagined with him. I grieved the realization that someone I had loved so deeply had never really known me at all, had never seen my value beyond what I could provide for him. But slowly, as the pain began to fade, something else emerged: relief, freedom, a sense of self-worth that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or validation. I threw myself into my work and got that promotion I had mentioned to Patricia Lynn. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my relationship with Marcus. I took a pottery class and learned to salsa dance. I traveled to Spain by myself and had the most amazing 2 weeks of my life. And gradually, I began to understand that Patricia Lynn had done me a favor, though certainly not intentionally. Her cruelty had forced me to see clearly what I had been trying to ignore, that I had been in love with someone who didn't value me, who didn't see me as an equal partner, who couldn't stand up for me when it mattered most. I heard through mutual friends that Marcus and his mother had recruited Caroline Henderson, the pediatric surgeon, for several family events. Apparently, she was everything Patricia Lynn had wanted in a daughter-in-law: accomplished, well-connected, appropriately pedigreed. I felt a moment of sadness for Marcus, who would probably never learn the difference between love and social convenience. But mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful that I had found the strength to walk away from a relationship that was slowly diminishing me. Grateful that I had refused to become smaller to make someone else more comfortable. Grateful that I had finally understood that being enough for the right person starts with being enough for yourself. 6 months after that disastrous dinner, I met David at a bookstore. He was funny and kind and passionate about his work as a high school teacher. When I told him about my job, he was genuinely interested and impressed. When I mentioned my parents' hardware store, he lit up and started telling me about how much he respected small business owners and entrepreneurs. But the moment I knew he was different was when we went to a dinner party together, and one of his friends made a dismissive comment about people who peaked in college. Instead of staying silent or changing the subject, David immediately shut it down. "Actually," he said firmly, "I think people who dismiss others based on educational pedigree are usually compensating for their own insecurities. Sarah has accomplished more in her career than most people I know, and she did it through talent and hard work, not family connections." Later, when we were alone, I thanked him for defending me. "You don't need to thank me for that," he said, looking genuinely confused. "That's just what you do for someone you care about. You protect them. You stand up for them. It's not optional." That's when I knew what it felt like to be enough for someone, Not because I had changed or improved or become more accomplished, but because I had found someone who saw my value from the beginning and wouldn't let anyone else diminish it. We've been married for 3 years now, and I still sometimes think about that dinner at Patricia Lynn's house, not with pain anymore, but with gratitude. Because if she hadn't shown me so clearly what it looked like to be with someone who didn't value me, I might never have recognized what it felt like to be with someone who did. Marcus reached out once, about a year after we broke up. He was engaged to Caroline, but he wanted to clear the air and apologize for how things had ended. I wished him well and meant it, but I didn't need his apology anymore. I had moved so far beyond needing his validation or his mother's approval that his regret felt irrelevant. I think about that moment sometimes, standing up in Patricia Lynn's perfect dining room, finding my voice after hours of being made to feel small, walking away from a relationship that was never going to give me what I deserved. It was one of the scariest and most important things I ever did. Because it taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to be enough for people who will never see your worth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from someone who claims to love you but won't fight for you when it matters. And sometimes the moment that breaks your heart is actually the moment that sets you free to find the love you really deserve. The kind of love that doesn't require you to diminish yourself, that sees you as enough exactly as you are, and that will defend your worth against anyone who tries to question it. That dinner changed my life, just not in the way Patricia Lynn intended. She meant to show me that I wasn't good enough for her world, but instead, she showed me that her world wasn't good enough for me. And for that unexpected gift of clarity, I will always be grateful.